I am working towards getting British citizenship.
Ooh.
Which is an interesting process.
Is this content? Because, like...
Yes.
Well, again, I'm...
Or should it not be?
Well, no, it should be content, but we haven't done an intro. Look, I really do think we need to make the intros more professional.
Oh.
Like, okay, let me give it a try. Okay. Welcome to another episode of OTMT. I'm Jake.
And I am Surma.
We're going to be talking about some bits about AI and Chrome in a bit. But first we should thank Shopify for letting us record this and for hosting it and for paying for it and just,
existing.
It's just nice, isn't it? It's just nice.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. They don't ask us to do that prompt.
They also didn't ask us to do the podcast.
They didn't ask for any of this, did they? So, which is why we didn't say anything about it in the last episode. So, this is just us being nice, really. They're being nice. We're being nice. We're all friends. What do you think about that, Surma? Was that good?
That was so good.
That'll get us into the top 3 in the next survey.
Once the survey's out, we're going to this podcast is sponsored by Shopify and the State of React survey, which you can find in the description. You should totally vote for us.
How about this for a smooth segue? But before we talk about tech, Surma, I heard that you are trying to get citizenship.
Oh, wow, Jake. That is a really astute observation. This is like one of our shared pet peeves is people giving tech talks and pretending to have a dialogue on stage.
Oh, God, why would you ever do it? Oh, no, it is. Yes. And it happens very much in the big corporate spaces, your Google I.O.s or internal conferences.
Yes.
They've planned it out. They know what they're going to say. They know what the other person's going to say. And
we all know they've rehearsed and scripted all of it.
So, Terry, what would I do if I wanted enhanced image generation as part of my website? Well, I'm glad you asked that, Samantha. Well, look at this demo. Oh, I hate it so much. I cannot stand it.
That reminded me a bit of that.
I'm in a bad mood already.
But you're correct, Jake. I am working towards British citizenship.
Well, there you go.
That's mostly the reaction I get, which is like, yeah, why?
Have you received your bunting? Yeah.
No, I think that will probably be mandatory. I'm still in the application process, so I'm early on, but you need to, get some proof of certain different things. Like, for example, that you are in fact capable of speaking English to a sufficient level.
And having a podcast that is in English wasn't enough for them, I suppose.
No. You have to get an official certificate for citizenship. You need to be at level B1 or above, which I was actually surprised by. B1 is speaking and hearing. There's no reading or writing in this test. And it's, it's intermediate. And, I guess it is very well enough English to, live in England and get along. But I thought...
Very well enough English? Are you sure? Did you pass this? Or are you about to tell us you failed?
That's the thing. I went to take that language test, not quite sure what to expect. And so, it was a very dodgy location for some reason where, it felt like a building that was on the brink of collapse and you're going down to the basement, kind of dimly lit. And then they have these...
It's a whole metaphor about the empire, I believe.
And they have these little booths and old... I want to say molding, probably not molding, but they look a bit molding headphones that you have to put on to, interact with the computer. But before that, they have to, check who you are and that you're the person that you claim to be, because they obviously have to make sure you're not taking the test for someone else. And you literally have to put everything from your pockets in your locker and turn your pockets inside out, and the metal detector. It actually was a bit disproportionate. But then once they have all this done and have confirmed your identity, they kind of sit you down for a quick questionnaire. When you move to the UK, what are you here for? Because you'd also need this test for some other different things, like getting a new passport sometimes, or if you just want to have a visa. And they asked me, so why are you here? And I was saying, well, I want to get neutralized.
Excuse me? Well, see, so that's why you can't have kids anymore, right?
I didn't want to get neutered. I want to get neutralized.
Oh, that's right. It's a different word.
Both were wrong. And then she looked at me squinting and I was like, taking a step back, naturalized.
Oh.
I'm here because I want to get naturalized, which brilliant start to proving that I am in fact capable of speaking English. So that
Excellent.
got my adrenaline up. Luckily, the entire test was on a computer with another person on the phone. But
so you had to go to a building, I guess, to verify identity. But then you're just doing the whole thing on Zoom or Hangouts or whatever, right?
they have really like strict supervision of the test environment. Like you can't look over to another person. You have to have your headphones on, which honestly, these headphones aren't very good. And you have like 3 other people around you having similar conversations with their test person over the phone. And it was all right. I passed one step closer, but I felt like if they had disqualified me in that very moment, I couldn't have held it against them.
So what's your next steps then? You've got to go on Bake Off.
You say that, but actually in the citizenship test, which I also have done and passed, some people have gotten questions about Bake Off.
Really?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
I've never seen a single episode. Or Doctor Who. Sorry.
Bake Off, I have watched a couple. I could have, said Paul Hollywood, but that's probably where it ends.
Oh, I do have the first 6 series of Red Dwarf entirely in my head, though. So I think I would use that.
Which I still haven't watched. You have recommended it to me multiple times, and I need to catch up on that. But instead of this, should we talk about the web?
Yes, let's do that. Because I want to talk about Chrome's new AI prompt API and how that kind of fits into the web and web standards.
Oh, AI API. That's a strong acronym.
And it means we can put AI in the episode title. It's so hot right now. It's what everyone's talking about.
So is it AI or is it LLMs?
It's LLMs, but come on. No one knows what that means.
I was trying to think if we should both in the tweet, because then we'll get all the AI driven Twitter accounts to reply to us.
Oh, yeah, we'll use LLM, we'll use AI, we'll put API in that. You know what? The episode title is going to look like a Roman numeral.
Yes, with some no Roman numerals that were invented.
So new letters in there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, tell me, this is basically riding the wave of giving people access to an LLM I guess that would be my first question. Is it a browser-defined LLM? Can I bring my own? How does it work? What does it look like, Jake? What does it look like?
I'll say it first. It's behind a flag. It's very experimental. There are a lot of hoops you need to jump through to get it working.
Sounds like a great experience.
Yeah. I tried to do it just the normal way, but I had to go and knock on the door of, some of my old friends over at Chrome to actually figure out how to even get it working. So it's not super simple, but they do say this is even more experimental than their usual behind a flag stuff, which is very experimental.
Do you think that's good? I mean, I basically getting developers in earlier than usual.
No, it's a good thing. It should, and I support any browser to just throw stuff in behind a flag. Because if it's behind a flag, it's fine. You know my feelings about standardization. We talked about it in the last episode.
Yeah.
But I think it should be anything behind a flag could be added and removed at any time.
If that flag is disabled by default.
If the flag is disabled by default, of course. Right, so I'll go through the API briefly. This is the API that's in their explainer, which is a little bit different to the API that's in Chrome. We'll link to the explainer as well.
Good start.
Well, again, what tends to happen in these cases is some browser engineers will just kind of experiment with a thing, and then there'll be a sort of explainer standards effort spun up at the same time.
Right.
And that's usually the point where someone actually starts thinking about the API properly. So, and then, the API will get redesigned, and then there'll be a bit of as tends to happen in the standards process, the API will change in the spec, or the explainer in this case, and it will change in the browser later. So the explainer is ahead of the spec, which is all fine.
Right. That's fine.
So there's a global, window.ai or self.ai or globalist.ai, whatever.
How do we feel about that?
Fine, whatever. Again, it's early days. I
thought we were trying to not do globals, because if it's if it's something provided by the user agent, it should be in Navigator or something.
I think globals are fine.
Okay.
I couldn't tell you why something would go in Navigator rather than, because it's Navigator.Service Worker, and I kind of wasn't part of that discussion so much. I don't know what the rules are. It's certainly not part of the document, So it shouldn't be document.ai. I think sticking stuff in Navigate is maybe something that shouldn't have happened with Service Worker. But yeah, maybe nervousness around the global scope was a thing. And in that namespace, there is .assistant. So which is another namespace. So AI.assistant.
That is nice because they're not conflating AIs with conversational LLMs. They're creating a whole namespace for AI stuff and creating a sub namespace for the specific chat-driven LLM stuff, which means later on, if you want to have image synthesis or anything similar, there is a namespace where this can now go. So actually, that's kind of nice.
And it's assistant rather than LLM because, maybe in future, this same thing will be done with something more advanced than LLMs or whatever. You could have an implementation just made with Markov chains, I suppose, right? It's not linking it to a particular technology. And then you've got the create method. So, AI.assistant.create. You can give it options like temperature, top K, which if you've worked with LLMs before, the kind of familiar terms. Assistant prompt, again, familiar thing, or initial prompts, which is you can give an example back and forth between the assistant and the user. And you can only do one of those too. And then, you get a promise for an object, and you get like a prompt method on that object or prompt streaming, and you give it some text and it gives you the reply. And that's pretty much it. You get clone and destroy methods, and there's some other stuff, but it's quite a small API.
You kind of offhand mentioned prompt streaming. Can I literally get token by token reply so I can make the reply build up, or do I only get?
Yes.
Great.
Not exactly that. I don't know if it's defined that it has to be token by token or if it's just some reasonable amount of streaming like you would with a network response.
Yeah.
You get text back.
Yeah, because I played around with LMs a little bit as well. And there was at start, I was like, I'm going to keep it easy. I just want the full response. But because you don't know that the LM might just go, I'm going to give you a really detailed answer for no reason whatsoever. And you suddenly wait 30 seconds until you actually get the full response, which is why streaming here, I think, is also very important. Also because you probably want to be able to cancel the response if the user says, actually, this is going the completely wrong direction, or I've seen the info that I need. Is there in a board controller signal that you can pass into the prompt streaming?
Yes, and that's actually one of the recent changes in the explainer that isn't in the browser yet, but it's there. I guess with the stream, you can just cancel the stream as well. But for the more kind of promise-based one, you've got the board controller. So this is something you can use to create autocomplete things, so proofread a document, summarize the thing, code generation, I guess, chat bots, translation maybe, although, there are more specific models for that. But it's, it's all kinds of stuff you could do with this. Well,
that's, I guess, then the next question, right? What is the model? Is that up to the user agent? Can the user link to a public model? Because, different models are good at different things.
It is down to the user agent, and the user does not get to pick. So in Chrome right now, it is an on-device model. It's Gemini Nano.
I mean, that's really interesting, right? The fact that this works offline. If it's on the device, that you can use this offline, that is actually very appealing.
Yes, but that does mean it has to download the model on first use. And the API is shaped to allow this. There's events and that kind of thing. It'll let you know if it's not going to be instantly ready. And the model is 2 gigabytes, and it unzips to 25 gigabytes.
Well, I mean, that's normal size for a React app nowadays.
Well, that's it, isn't it? It's it does, when we were doing DevRel things, we were 1 megabyte is quite a lot for your homepage. And it's, if going up to 2 gigabytes is it's going to be fun to try and justify that.
The question here would be, does it re-download it every time for every origin? Or is this where we're now breaking one of the long-standing pillars or something of the web, where we said that we can't cache across origins because that's a timing attack? But maybe if it's a user agent provided LLM, is it okay to download it once and cache it for all sites to use?
You are absolutely correct. Yeah, it is that. So it's a one download into Chrome, and then it can be used on all sites. Yeah, it's not a problem doing that because it's an internal thing. The reason we don't bleed the cache across origins is because it can be used for cookie-like things. But here you don't get access to the bytes of the model. The cookies never influence the model anyway, I think. So it's totally fine to do that in this case. And maybe there will be cases as well, all phones are now our phone's got AI built in or something. So you might not need to download anyway because it just came with your phone and it's updated via the OS. Although that's not part of this experiment, but you can see that. You can imagine that world.
I mean, you say it's not part of the experiment, but I guess in the end, it's really up to the user agent to decide, do I need to download something, or can I just forward this or be an adapter somehow to whatever the operating system already provides? Like, could Edge on Windows just be an adapter to Cortana? Or, I don't know exactly how, but, that could work.
Yeah, exactly that. And we've seen that happen with other specs before. The shape detection API, which is not really fully implemented, but things like that just call out to the inbuilt OS stuff. But there's nothing stopping implementers using a cloud service for this, which, okay, it wouldn't work offline, but otherwise it's not a crazy thing to do. Like push messages are already using a cloud service, right?
No, and I guess, I haven't used Gemini Nano directly myself, but I'm assuming that side of a model can only be so capable when, Llama 3.1 just came out with its, what was it, 280 gigs or something?
Right.
It could be like a progressive enhancement where when you're offline, it uses what is available offline. But if you're online and you're not on like a metered connection, it might actually use the model in the cloud just because it is more capable. That being said, I'm very much playing around with LLMs and stuff. So I couldn't be further from an expert or having good experience here, but I feel like the system prompts, you're right, are very much tailored to the model you work with. And the same system prompt will give wildly different results when applied to a different model, especially when it's a different, amount of parameters. It can only smaller context windows or just like generally has been trained on a different set. And like LLMs by themselves are already hard to quote unquote program against because even with the same model and the same system prompt, the results are often varying and sometimes unreliable. Now switching out the models, like you're saying, oh yeah, the user agent will give you a model. How useful is that?
I couldn't agree more. I think that's the big problem with this. You have to sort of engineer your prompt and sometimes engineer not just a system prompt, but the way you ask particular questions. And that is per model, right? And I don't think we get to a state where, well, if you get to request a particular model, or sort of download your own, I think a lot of the benefit of this particular API is gone, right? Because then that 2 gigabytes is now per site, or maybe, different parts of the same site are using different versions. And
then you could just use WebGPU. I know WebGPU actually doesn't expose some of the necessary types, like the 8-bit floats and 4-bit integers that lots of the LLM file formats use. But I think they're working on that.
Well, there's also a WebNN spec, and that's behind a flag in Chrome.
Oh.
Which is kind of like tailored towards that exact use case. So it would be able to use like neural CPU stuff rather than just relying on the GPU, but it can rely on the GPU.
Interesting.
Yeah, we might touch on that a little bit later as well. But yeah, so when we designed Service Worker, like we put a bit in the spec to say, if there's too much work happening in the Service Worker, and it's not linked to a particular response, you can terminate it, right? Because it's doing work when it shouldn't be doing. And we just said, like, you leave it up to the browser to decide what too long is, because that can change over time, or different user agents can have different opinions. But when Safari implemented, they were just like, right, just tell us which one number you use, and we'll do that number. Because, like, if we don't, and if we pick another number, someone's going to file a bug that it's different to Chrome. Right. And I thought, okay, it's interesting and true because they were speaking from experience.
Yeah.
But that's all that's going to happen here, right? Like, let's say Chrome ships this API and then later Safari does, and they ship with a better model. Even though the model's better, it might not produce as good results because all of the usage out there is tweaked towards the particular Chrome one. Like, as you say, they've worked on all the system prompts for this Gemini Nano model.
Yeah.
And people are going to say, well, the Safari one's rubbish, isn't it? Even though it might be objectively better if it's given the right kind of prompts. So then you maybe Safari feel pressure to use the same model as Chrome and blah, blah, blah. And it's, not a great situation.
This might be like a very uninformed opinion, but the thing where LLMs for me suddenly became really interesting and useful is when I played around, this is now, maybe half a year ago or something, played around with ChatGPT 3.5 at the time, for the first time and looked at the API and saw that they have functions. I think they're now called tools, where you basically in addition to, your system prompt or maybe previous messages, you also provide a JSON schema descriptions of functions that this assistant is allowed to invoke instead of providing a textual response. So, you could provide a function like get temperature in location, and it takes a parameter of a location and returns the temperature. And now if the user asks, what's the temperature in Tokyo right now? It has been trained to not say, I'm a AI system that can't really tell you what's going on in the world, but rather go, hey, I have a...
Or even worse, just guess.
Yeah. Just hallucinate an
I
answer.
have some historical data, so I'll just pick a number.
Yeah, and then it would invoke that tool.
Right.
You would then on your end see, it wants to invoke the tool. You invoke the tool, you supply the answer, and then it would use the return value from that function and generate a textual response with the actual data woven in. And in that sense, for me, then an LM became a English language to function call adapter and back.
Yeah, so you could try and do that with this, right? But you would be kind of trying to feed that all into the system prompt.
Exactly. I tried doing that with some other models, which were not specifically trained to support this, and kind of teach them through the system prompt to do that. I wonder if that would narrow the scope of this API more. It's this is an assistant that can, turn English into function calls and then provide a textual response. Or you can decide to not let it generate a textual response and just function calling is enough. That's how I build a to-do list manager, where basically I can just say, hey, add milk to my shopping list. And because it has a function that says add an item to a shopping list, it calls that function. And I don't really invoke it anymore. It could then, if I did, it would say, I have just added milk to your shopping list. Here is now your new full shopping list. But I don't care about that, so I don't even invoke it afterwards anymore. Again, very naive opinion, but I wonder if this kind of pattern would be more stable across different language models that different user agents could provide their own implementation for. And I would think it becomes more useful to building apps as well, because I think what most people are looking for is that where, you build your to-do list app and you want to be able to quickly say into your microphone, remind me tomorrow to do X, or you want to say into your email app, send an email to my mom, and that should really just take an action, and you don't want to have it, respond in English, and now you have to programmatically analyze the English to figure out what you want to do.
Yes.
So I feel that's why I was wondering about this API, because if it's all just, chat, how do you integrate that meaningfully into your app? I guess, you put stuff in the system prompt so it can ask questions, but that seems only very limited in the use case that will reliably work.
Yeah, and this could be added to the API, right? There's an options object there, which would be a very obvious place to put these kind of functions.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would limit the kind of models that could be used on the other side. And maybe there's is that future proof as a surface? But sure, it could be done. I think some of this kind of difference between the models, they do acknowledge it in the explainer. They've got this bit that says, we do not intend to provide guarantees of language model quality, stability, or interoperability between browsers. In particular, we cannot guarantee that the models exposed by these APIs are particularly good at any given use case. These are left as quality of implementation issues, similar to the shape detection API, which is why that API was in my head earlier. And I get it, but I don't think that is equivalent. Because, yes, one shape detector may be better than another, but there's a right answer, or there's a very narrow set of things that can be considered a right answer. It's scan that barcode. Where are the faces in this photo? It can be measured objectively. Even a translation API, though there's a sort of wider set of correct answers and it's a little bit more subjective, it's still a fairly small range of what's correct. Whereas in this case, if the task is to write a poem about a cat that lives on Mars, right? The range of correct and good is wide open. I will tell you that Gemini Nano is very bad at writing a poem about a cat on Mars, but that's besides the point.
I mean, there are benchmarks that all the different models use to compare each model against each other model, and maybe that's one way to do it. But I tend to agree that it seems very hard here to provide a somewhat consistent user experience. With face detection, it's kind of the goal is kind of clear. There's a picture, it should find all the faces, and you can easily Safari struggled here, Chrome didn't. File a bug in Safari UI, isn't it seeing this face?
Yeah.
While with the other one, it's what is the process? Are all browsers going to start collecting failing system prompt response tuples and add them to their training set and continually upgrade. It just doesn't seem quite the same. In general, like, as I said, like, I already just like working with one well-known, well-defined LLM, even there, I find it unreliable. I always compare it to like, it's like a programming language where any statement has only a certain percentage of actually being executed. And nobody would choose that language to build critical infrastructure, right? And so it feels a bit like I would not want to put anything critical in there. And I guess I'm not saying that this should be a critical part of your web app, but
absolutely.
I would not know how to write a system prompt that gives a reliable user experience if I don't even know which model I'm building against. And then it's like, are we going back to user agent sniffing?
Exactly. And I think you would be. You would want the model to identify itself, which now is quite a fingerprinting vector, especially if it might differ by location, which maybe it would. I don't know if it would or not. You know, you can imagine a case where in China you get a different model because of particular rules. You know, it's.
I mean, that's already the case, right? Like, Meta has released a different version for Llama 3.1 in the EU than anywhere else.
Well, okay, there you go. I think that is one of the biggest problems with this, but there's another problem, and that is terms and conditions.
Oh boy.
Gemini has a use policy, which says what you're allowed and not allowed to do with it. And we'll link to it, but there's a lot of sensible stuff in there, like don't use it to generate hate speech, okay? Which, fine, but I think it's a bit weird having a separate policy for that. Like, when you look at the spec for the video element, it doesn't say, by the way, don't use this to display pirated content, you know, because we've got laws for that, right? In the same way we have laws for hate speech. But there is a rule in the T's and C's that says you cannot use it to create sexually explicit content.
Okay, Mom.
Right. Well, I feel that's a step too far. Like why not? Why can't I use it for that?
Someone made a really interesting parallel, and I feel bad I don't remember who it was. I think it was Andrew Huang. I'm going to link to his video because I think that was a really good one. But he kind of said, you know, when the camera was invented, did we say you may not take photos of naked people? You may not take photos of another painting because, you know, it's making an exact copy of another artist's work. And that sounds quite familiar of the whole ethical problem we have with generative AI in general right now. So should the law really like control the tool or the person using the tool, right? Like, should the LLMs necessarily be this constrained and even trained to the point where they can perform certain tasks rather than saying, you know, they can do these tasks, but you're just not allowed to use them that way and putting the burden on the human. And I guess, you know, that's probably like a healthy middle ground, but I think it's quite an interesting parallel to say with a camera, I can create a perfect duplicate of the Mona Lisa. That doesn't mean we are training cameras to not be able to do that or make you sign a waiver. You may not take a photo of the Mona Lisa.
Well, it's interesting there. It's like photocopiers are trained not to photocopy money, right? So it does happen.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating that there's a series of dots on money that is there to be picked up by things like photocopiers to stop. It's called EURion, as an EURion, but a play on Orion, because it's like a little constellation shape.
Oh.
But it was, I think, started in the EU, which is why it's got EU at the start. So, and it's there. Yeah. So you could just put that pattern on your documents somewhere and then they can't be photocopied, which is kind of fun.
Oh, I have to try that.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. I think, so if you build a site around this to summarize the content of an email and someone puts an email in there that was quite a raunchy email, like, who's at fault? Like, who's breaking the rules? Like, is it me because I fed it as a developer? I fed it to the API. Is it the user?
Yeah.
But it's just in general, like, why is this even a problem? Like, it should just be. It doesn't feel like an open web thing, and also it's going to be, you know, that's the Gemini rules. So if this all ships in multiple browsers, you're now having to deal with the rules of each model. Depending on the browser or even the device if it's a built-in model.
Yeah, and I'm guessing as a user of Chrome, you accept those terms when you start Chrome, but as the web app developer,
right,
did I have to accept these terms?
I think the idea is you do, yeah, like, which is why it's weird.
Yeah, but then, you know, I could just say, oh, I just, you know, pipe through a prompt from a user that generated hate speech, or you know, and then the user's on the hook, or if the developer just hard codes a prompt that will generate hate speech every single time, but then the user is being held responsible, because how do you get a hold of the web developer? That's a really weird problem to have.
I guess it's not a new problem, because you've got the same with social media sites where people can post like hate speech or whatever, and it's kind of, I'm sure they've sort of figured out exactly who's at fault in certain cases there, and what the onus is on the host to remove that content as in a timely manner. But again, it tends to be things which are either things the site has imposed on itself, like a particular forum could say we don't want sexually explicit material, whereas like here it's a single API that is implemented in a particular way by a particular browser is coming with its own rules, which is it doesn't feel like the web platform to me at all.
Yeah,
I'm kind of wondering like how serious is Chrome about any of this? So when you look at their blog posts about it, they say these built-in AI features will reimagine the web. Like, it doesn't just create a new chapter of the web, it creates a whole new era. And that's the words they use, which is quite strong, isn't it?
Wow.
But the blog post, which we'll link to about this particular feature, it only has a vague high-level description. It doesn't actually tell you how can you use this API, like what even the flags are, what the API is. It doesn't link to the explainer. If you want that, you have to fill in a Google form, and they might get back to you with more details, maybe.
Wow. Open web.
It's odd, isn't it? And even with the explainer and the secret doc you might get access to after you fill in the form, it's still, like I said, I had to go to someone on the DevRel team and for help, because it was hard to use. So I've got two theories about what's going on here. The first is that Chrome has been burned in the past by folks suggesting that they are just going to unflag a feature and ship it as is. And I think some of this is genuine confusion around what a flagged feature is. But a lot of time it is done by people who do know better, and they're just using it to rile up folks against Chrome. Like, there was an incident last year while I was still at Google, where folks got really angry about the poor accessibility of a CSS toggles implementation. But it was just behind a flag. It was an experiment, and it was non-standard. It was buggy. Everything you would expect from something behind a flag at the experimental stage. But people, again, who I think knew better, spun a story that Chrome was just going to ship this with its accessibility problems because they hate blind people and whatever. And people got angry about this because they that's what they were being told to be angry about this, because Chrome was just going to ship it, and they weren't. So maybe Chrome's trying to change its strategy here, like by making the experiment kind of super secret. But it's not secret because they're telling you it's going to be a new era in a chapter of the web, So it's, I don't know. My other theory is that Google was rattled by how far ahead OpenAI and Microsoft were with the AI stuff, and they had a number of embarrassing failures with their own models. Gemini kind of looked a bit rubbish compared to the OpenAI stuff. So people asking questions about, could this topple the dominance of the search engine? And we've seen that recently with OpenAI's search thing. I can't remember what it's called, but you saw how that wobbled the Google stock price.
Yeah.
So I think for Google I/O, they just threw everything AI at it to be seen to be doing something. The thing didn't really matter, I don't think, as long as it was AI. You look at the talks for Google I/O this year, and it's everything is AI. So I think that's why you end up with these blog posts saying this is this API is heralding a new era of the web. And it's like, oh, can I see the API? No, you may not. And so it's kind of like being seen to be doing something without really doing it, and without showing you that they've not done much around it.
Yeah.
But then, the explainer is being actively developed. So it's really difficult to get a read on it. For the reasons we've talked about, I don't see this making it into browsers. They do say that in the blog post it might come to nothing, or it might make it into the extensions API, where you can, rely on the model and they can put the model ID in there.
I mean, in the defense, it's, clearly sparking discussions. This idea of like, can we put this in the browser? And I think that's a good thing. They're trying something, and they're, seeking feedback. The way I went about it, could probably be done a bit better. Like, I saw this article as well where they announced it, and there was like nothing in there what this API would look like. And I was like, well, that's weird. But the fact that they're saying, let's try this. What do people think? And if that leads to, now we're going to do this, then, at least this information, this discussion has been had, and we have good reasons, or know the reasons why this shouldn't be done, at least not in this specific way. So I think that's quite good. And, I feel like people expect Google to be one of the top tier players in the AI field with DeepMind and Google Brain and all this stuff. And so their start was rocky. I think now actually Gemini is one of the really good performing models. So they have, I think, caught up. I don't think they have kind of repaired their reputation necessarily. I'm not sure how Gemini is perceived overall, but at least they're now, they're in the head-to-head race.
Nano is pretty shaky, I would say. Gemini Nano is, but it's on device, which you would expect it not to be as good as the cloud level ones, which are orders of magnitude bigger. But
well, I guess that's where currently the new Llama 3.1 seems to be doing amazing, something that you can run on your own device, and it's doing really quite well. As I said, I haven't played with Gemini Nano, so I think the whole running LLMs on your own device is a younger sub-discipline in the whole LLM field. Now that devices suddenly all have neural network specific cores and stuff like that. But I think this is something worth exploring, because clearly the use cases are going to the amount of apps that make use of AI technology are going to continue rising. And I think the amount of apps that want to use these or offer these, even while offline or on flaky internet, also want to start rising. And so, starting to explore how this work, I think that is good. So I'm glad they're doing it.
I want to stress this is not an anti-AI rant, and I think seeing AI go into more specific APIs like shape detection or translation, image scaling. I would love to see AI image scaling in the browser.
Yeah.
Yeah, seeing AI being used for more specific APIs, I think, is a really, really easy win. The prompt API, I think, I'm not so sure about that. But there is WebNN, Web Neural Network spec, as the kind of low level, the equivalent to Web GPU.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it is behind a flag in Canary. I don't know how much active development it's getting, but yeah, in that case, you have to download the model yourself. But then you can rely on the model. And there's obviously issues with the size of the model. But I'll link to a Microsoft doc, because I think they're the ones actively working on it. And they've got a load of demos, some of which don't work, but some of which do work, which is fun. Yeah, we'll link to all that. And that feels like a nice low-level way of doing it. But I do see the point is that if there's a model on your device already, should you be able to just call out to it? But the whole thing where you have to manage your prompt per model just seems like the biggest blocker to me.
That does seem problematic. It kind of brings us then back to the age-old discussion. Why doesn't the browser just bundle jQuery or bundle React? You know what? If we have a king-of-the-hill model, could that just be bundled? I mean, the main problem with that at the time was that you could... Well, you're a kingmaker, right? Makes it very hard for any other model to compete with you and replace you, because yours will always already be available while they have to download 80 gigs or whatever the size of models in the future is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, we'll link to the docs, and there are some blog posts out there now which are kind of tell you how to play around with it, and I assume that'll get easier over time. We'll link to the explainer, demos and stuff, and WebNN. But yeah, go have a play with it, see what you think. Yeah, you've already listened to 40 minutes of what we think about it. Go and make your own mind up.
Yeah, let us know.
That's all I had to say about that.
Then should we stop talking?
I think we should. That's enough from us, I reckon.
Agreed.
So, yeah, all there is left to say is happy next time. Bye.
Pressing stop.
Amazing.